Hello, everyone. Welcome to this podcast around sustainability and meaning of life. Today, we have with us Nicolette, who is the founder of Urban 2050. Nicolette loves exploring and addressing issues society often dreads to talk about. Her focus is to co create a sustainable future in the 21st century. She also runs a weekly show called as the Smart Sustainability with Nicolette DeVidar, a TV show that talks about sustainable future in this digital age. It discusses what empowered citizens need to know about the ongoing change, intelligent use of resources, smart governance, smart industry, inclusive communities, human empowerment, a sustainable and human centered economy, and sustainable urbanization. And these are also a few points that we'll touch base today in our podcast. Welcome, Nicolette.
Thank you very much for having me on, Lakir. Great to be on.
Awesome. So, Nicolette, to start with, right? Maybe let's start about sustainability. What sustainability is all about, right? What does it mean? Maybe you can start there and gradually move on to a more detailed
Yes.
set of questions.
And herein lies the problem because we're being bombarded with sustainability and what we're supposed to do and not supposed to do, eat meat, do not eat meat, cook, do not cook, all these things. But when you
Yeah.
really ask about what sustainability is, when you ask people about what sustainability is, the majority of people, in fact, I'm so bold and say, based on the numbers of interviews we took, that over 96% of people do not know anything about what sustainability is. So here we
Yeah.
are in this day and age, basically trying to create a sustainable planet when we don't even know what it means to be sustainable, when we don't know what sustainability is and
Mhm.
where it comes from. So we talk about all the mechanistic views of the world, seeing the world, we need to put windmills there and solar power there and all these things. But when you ask people, what are we actually learning from nature about this? They
Yeah.
turn blank.
Mhm. True. True. I completely agree with you. In fact, Nicolette, there have been instances where I have been discussing with a few people about what is sustainable lifestyle. I have been working with people, right? So I come from the marketing space. So we have a lot of businesses that say that they are sustainable. They focus on sustainable fashion and all these things. But then when we actually, as you mentioned, when we actually look at the end user, right? When we ask them what sustainability is all about, it's like threatening to know that people are not even aware about that. We are moving in a direction where this topic is really important. And as you also mentioned, right, 96% of the people, if those are the stats, then it's really concerning.
Yeah, but the thing is also, look, we all know
Mhm.
our planet is in a very difficult stage. We all know we're
Right.
looking at potential food shortages. We all know we look at
True.
depleted soil. We all know, most of us do, that the way we treat nature and the environment is off, and there's a lot to do that we actually can do and have to do to be a
Mhm.
lot more sustainable. And when you compare actually how a natural living organism works in nature to how most of our systems are structured in life, you see this huge discrepancy. There is from the economic system to the banking system to how we all fit into the landscape. But the biggest issue is that word sustainability gets shoved down our throat
Mhm.
without really knowing what that means. And so I think that it is time for everyone to go on a quest and actually look, wait a minute here, what makes us sustainable as people?
Right.
What makes us sustainable when everything around us is collapsing? What sustains you?
Mhm.
And there we can actually look at, when we look at nature particularly, nature has been around for billions of years.
Yeah.
So it knows how to sustain,
True. Yeah.
clearly. So
Yeah.
there's a lot we can learn from nature itself in how it sustains. And actually also understanding the word. Sustaining really means what keeps you going when everything else you around you is dying or breaking away. So clearly there
Mhm.
is a different component to it. Obviously there is an essence of life in there, and that brings me to the life force, because
Mhm.
that's what sustainability focuses on. It's the life, not about any mechanistic terms on machines and how these things interact. And actually, when we look at how sustainability nowadays is approached, we put windmills in places that completely destroy
Mhm.
landscape, that nobody knows how to ever recycle them, and that kill birds in the process. So there are all these other components to it, but we still take a fragmented approach to how to
Mhm.
make the planet sustainable. And where does it come from? Because we have no connection to the actual origin of life. We approach it from the physical side without understanding where the life force comes from. And that
Mhm.
takes us in a completely different direction, in a completely different domain.
True. True. Certainly. Certainly. Also, Nicholas, that said, right? As you said, there are a lot of things happening in the direction of making everything sustainable, right? But then they are not happening in the way they should happen. Like you gave an example of windmills, right? They are getting installed, they are there, but in the process of getting installed, there are a lot of things that are getting hampered, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like when it comes to sustainable living, right, or when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to thinking about sustainability, what do you think is the very prime focus that we need to have, even as individuals, right? Now, when we speak about windmills and all these other things, the efforts that government is taking, that's at a very larger scale, right? But then, as an individual, what do you think is necessary?
I think the very first thing we need to do is look at nature. How is nature structured? How is nature
Yeah.
organized? What is it about nature that actually made it sustain for billions of years?
Right.
Where is that life force coming from? Where is this ability coming from to actually keep changing with change? And that
Mhm.
brings us then literally right to the paradox, because clearly there is a part that's eternal and there is a part that dies, which is when you look at the human body, that kind of is very similar to that as well. So there's
Mhm.
everything on the physical side is cyclical, it decays, but yet the old has already the new in it. So when it goes on,
Yeah.
so this is sort of this creative process. And I think when we really look at sustainability, how can we be sustainable? The first
Mhm.
thing we need to do, turn to nature. Look at how it does it. Look at how it's structured. What is it governed by? Try
Mhm.
to understand how these different areas of nature actually connect with us. We can't go around and
Yeah.
say, oh, we make these sustainable cities and all this stuff without actually even knowing how a sustainable ecosystem or an organism does it.
Does that? Yeah. True.
And I'm not talking of the biological part, because if we just look at the
Mhm.
plain biological part, that isn't going to get us there, because that's not where the
Yeah.
life force is coming from. Clearly, there's a different component to it, the life
Mhm.
force, and that comes from the other end. That comes from the spiritual side of creation,
True.
not the physical side of creation. And I
Right.
think we live in a world where we've taken on such a mechanistic view that we approach everything from the physical plane, when the process of manifestation goes from the spiritual to the physical, not reverse.
Yeah. Right. Right. Also, Nicola, that brings me to another question, right? Now that we are so disconnected from the nature, because as you said, if we want to be sustainable, the very first thing we need to do is look at the nature, learn how nature has been there for these billions of years and how it has been evolving and sustaining, right? But then,
And why is and why everything is there? Look, nature is
yeah.
100% economical, right? It produces zero
Mhm.
waste. So you can actually, with 100% certainty, say that whatever exists has a reason.
Yeah.
Weeds have a reason. We might cut them away and find them as a pest, but when you actually look deeper, There's a lot of healing power in those plants or weeds, and there is a real
Yeah.
big reason as to why they exist. So asking the why questions, that's a really first start.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Also, so Nicolette, getting back to the piece that I was talking to you about, right?
Mm.
So, we are, of course, disconnected from the nature. And you said that the life force it starts from spirituality, right? When you understand that, that's when you get into it comes from spiritual to the physical world, right? But then I also feel that human beings today are also disconnected from spirituality,
Yes, and I think
right?
that's exactly the problem. I think
Yeah,
the problem is that we took God out of nature, so to speak, and nature
yeah.
became this thing in our
Hmm.
minds and how we approach it. So we do
Right.
not see the sacred in everything. We don't see the
Hmm.
spirituality in it. We don't see that sanctity of life that's in every aspect. So, in a way, if I'm saying that, I think we need to bring God back into the flower, if I can use this as a more metaphor in how to approach that.
Yeah, yeah. So also, Nicole, now that we're talking about spirituality, having a sense of God being present, right, and looking at nature in a different way, through a different lens altogether, right? As you said, like people need to look at nature like they have taken out God from everything, right? That's why I believe that disconnect is there. But then, do you feel if people are more aware of their higher purpose of life, probably they'll be more inclined towards sustainable practices. Like I know that people can only know their higher purpose when they get into spirituality or when they connect with the nature, right? And I read a lot about spirituality, a lot of books around that, and whatever I've read, I've known that uh, that is the only way you can connect with the nature, right?
Mhm.
So, do you think knowing the higher purpose is going to solve this problem? And that said, then spirituality becomes a default method to go towards, right?
I think it does, but here's the thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think these two are connected. You can't
Yeah.
really get to your higher purpose unless you see how everything that's in nature lives in you and how you live in everything you see. And
Mm-hmm.
vice versa, because otherwise you always get only a part of it. And I think if we really go in the full way, I think this is
Mm-hmm.
it really, that one does work both ways. So if you're
Yeah.
more in tune with your purpose and you have a more intuitive spiritual connection with purpose and something beyond, something on the other side, I
Mm-hmm.
think it makes you much more receptive and open and intuitively connect more with when you see a bird, for example, or when you see plants or something. Your heart knows that there is more to
Yeah.
it.
True.
So I think it works both ways. For
Both
those
ways.
who are not quite in that space,
Mm-hmm.
starting with nature could be great to actually transcend and see how does this play a role? How can you actually get to the other side? How does that relate to me?
Mm-hmm.
Everything that exists is about relationships, right?
Yeah.
But then also when you know your higher purpose, when you're more in tune, I think it also makes you much more aware and intuitively able to access all those different parts to see
Mm-hmm.
the spark in everything
Yeah.
that is there.
That's there. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. In fact, you answered my next question a bit. I was actually going to come to this question where I was going to ask you, how do people get started uh, in this in this direction, right? How do they, like? I know spirituality is tough. Not everyone is a fan of it. Not everyone thinks that spirituality is for them, right? But
Hmm.
then you partly answered the question wherein even if they start getting close to the nature, that's where they can at least start observing, feeling the thing, and then start thinking that okay, this is for them, right? The nature is present for their own well-being and for their own sustainability.
Yeah, I think there are many different ways to sort of connect with the spiritual life. We all know
Mhm.
everyone, they can be as individual as we are. Everyone is at a different stage,
Different.
everyone is at a
True.
different point, everyone
Mhm.
has a different starting point, everyone comes from a different background,
Yeah.
everyone perceives things differently. So the path can vary for everyone. It can be a very different path. But I do think the one thing they all have in common is
Mhm.
that there are some universal principles that are in all of these paths. And those
Mhm.
universal principles are the same across all faiths. They're the same
True.
across, they're present in every living organism. And we can see them actually even in the physical structure of living organisms. So they are in there. Like, for example, why have we two hands? Not three, not
Mhm.
four, not five. No, we have two. There's a
Yeah.
reason for it. Why do we have
Mhm.
5 fingers on each hand? There's a
Yeah.
reason for it. It's not just out of, suddenly, oh, this is why we have the perfect equality with two hands. No,
Mhm.
there is a reason for it. There's a meaning for it. And I think
Yeah.
once you start diving into that meaning, independent of where your starting point is, once you start the
Mhm.
why question, it
Yeah.
automatically takes you on a path that is resonating with you, that sort of helps you reconnect with your soul and reconnect
Mhm.
going forward. But I do think nature is a great starting point for everyone, really, independent of where you are. Because
Right.
right now we are in a really dire situation in many ways when it comes to nature and the planet. So
Mhm.
I think it is sort of something that's literally right in front of our face.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to look away, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah. It is. It is. Nicholas, our talk just reminds me of this one Sanskrit quote that's there, right? Which says "Aham Brahmasmi," which means I am the universe, right? So I believe even if people start believing that, right? So here in India, at least, when you say "Aham Brahmasmi," that means the universe is within you, right? And
Yeah.
it's really easy to connect and understand what's happening, and also to understand what the universe wants you to do, or what the universe is telling you to do, right? So this just brought that up in my mind, that this quote. So it's all within us. Probably it's how we look at things and how we identify, how we can get closer to the nature, and then we can start thinking about everything, that's like being mindful of everything that's around us, and focusing more on making it sustainable.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Now, I personally find actually the use in English of being mindful a bit too weak,
Mhm.
because that could also mean mind happens all in your mind, and it's really
Yeah.
not. Because when
Mhm.
you go through that building that bridge that we need to sort of go through, transcend through nature and understand more the spiritual part of it, that's
Mhm.
also very similar to building the bridge between your head and your heart. And the interesting
True.
thing is that the heart knows what the head never understands.
Yeah, that's true.
So
That's
there is
true.
this paradox that's out there when you look at nature, those contrasts, the opposites.
Mhm.
Your heart understands intuitively. The mind
Mhm.
does not. The mind
Does
needs the
not. Yeah.
linear way of functioning. The brain needs the linear way of functioning
Yeah.
as an organ. But the heart does not.
True.
That's why you
True.
have, I think we struggle so much very often with this, with integrating paradoxes, because our brain tells us, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. It's either or.
Mhm.
But when you look at it from a different perspective, it never is either or. It's
Right.
either and or
Either and all. Yeah.
together. So it's this
Exactly.
integrative part that I is I believe is what the heart, and I'm meaning more like the spiritual heart, automatically knows. It just knows. You
Mhm.
may not be able to explain it, but you just know.
Yeah.
And the head, the mind itself
It needs
doesn't
logic.
grasp.
Yeah, the brain a lot of time needs logic to everything that's happening, whereas the heart a lot of times already knows what is right, what is wrong, or it somehow knows things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly. There is, I actually heard once from a very wise teacher. He was
Hmm.
a Hasidic teacher, and he said, only those who love can believe. And I think when you really think about this,
Yeah,
there is a lot in it that
exactly.
takes us to that space.
True, true. And I believe, Nicolette, this is also true for what we have been discussing, right? You said only who love can believe, right? So probably when it also comes to this topic about nature, right? We see a lot of people who have nothing to do with the nature.
Hmm.
They'll be littering around. They are like careless because probably that love is not there, right? And that's maybe the reason that a lot of people don't think about what's happening with the nature, or probably a lot of people think that okay, we are just going to live for a specific number of years, right? So while I am here, the nature has to be good, and I don't care what happens after I leave this body, or once I leave this place, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's again
That's why I
a
think
sad
this
part.
time, that particular time that we're in, is a really important and interesting time. Because I think
Right.
even if people do not care about nature, if they go out, they leave their stuff, their trash, they have no connection whatsoever. If the thing is, what's happening worldwide is that people are in a stage where I don't think humanity has ever been under attack that much, where everything that is human is being attacked. What we
Right.
believe, what we think, how we identified with everything else. But here's the thing, when everything is taken from you and you don't know anymore who you are you male, are you female, are you whatever you are, if you're a thing or not,
Yeah.
the best way and the only way to actually sort of reorient yourself is to see, how do these things function in nature? What's a flower? What's the purpose of a flower? You actually can learn a lot about nature and reconnect this way in a very powerful way. Like if you have no identity, if you really don't know, you're sort of like in a drain and you're sort of like, I don't know how where I'm gonna go, how I can move and things like that. You can start watching, for example, how an animal does it. Not just an animal, whatever comes across you. It could be a small little bird, for example, and you can look at the bird and see, well, how does the bird actually fly without any worries and without sorrows, and it just soars through the sky. You can learn about how do plants actually germinate seeds in the dark, so you don't need to see everything and yet something is happening. We
Right.
can learn the process of bringing something forth by planting something. Plant a tree. If you don't know how to do it and develop the patience, plant a tree. You'll see how it grows. So
True.
there are a lot of things like you can learn, for example, yeah, where does different aspects that are really important of life to sort of find a new identity and reorientation. And I think the best way to do it is really to look at different aspects in nature. So, in
Yeah.
other words, if we've lost everything, and I think at this point it is fair to say that most of us are so deeply confused in what's going on, who we are, who do we want to be, who do we want to become, the question really becomes then, where do we look towards to get some orientation? And where else can you look when you can't look at anything in your life that was illusionary there, that you thought was there, but it's not?
It's not. Yeah.
It's not there. Then isn't it normal that you look outside and say, so wait a minute, so that tree is still standing, although the branches are really great and bend inside of sort of all different directions, but the stem of the tree is still there and
It's
it
still
stays
there. Yeah.
strong. So you kind of start looking at these things, and then when you actually look deeper, we realize it actually, everything made sense. And that, I think it also brings it back to the long missed sanity part, the reason part of things, how
Yeah.
we approach life, how we live in society, how do we function, how do we interact with one another, how do we relate to each other.
Hmm.
Where else would we learn that than looking at nature, which is really the only thing that's still there right in front of our
Yeah.
eyes?
And one of the longest living things. So, Nicolette, I believe here observation is the key to all the things that we're discussing today, right? Observing the nature, learning from it at each and every stage, and then adapting to it or inculcating all those things in your daily routine or daily life, right? Is what the key takeaway is, I believe.
I think the big takeaway is really to start be more observing and understand more the messages of what you see outside, and then see how it actually relates to you. Like, I have a
Right.
little hummingbird. I give you an example. I have a little
Okay.
hummingbird that was actually just there again, flying in front of the window. And I love the way that little hummingbird comes every day, every morning about the same time. And he goes to the plants, and when you
Mhm.
see this tiny little bird goes with such a determination and exact knowledge, and goes to the plants and takes out just the essence of what's really good for him, the
Mhm.
nectar, the best of the best, was really
Right.
good for the tiny little bird. And he does that so joyfully and so full of energy, and with such a dynamic to it,
True.
that if you really watch this for a while and you understand, sort of, you
Mhm.
watch the process, you cannot do other than opening up and sort of see, so I'm resonating with this because possibly something of that quality is
Mhm.
also in me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That is. That is. This actually is a great example, Nicolette. Like one right away what you saw, and then you translate that into how we can learn from those things. Awesome.
Sometimes I think the little animals have to come and visit us because they can teach us so much about life.
So yeah,
You know,
exactly,
they really do.
exactly.
I give you another example. I'm actually afraid of mice. I do not like mice, and that's probably
Okay.
coming from my upbringing because, we used to have horses that we had to feed in the morning, and so when you had to go in the stable at 5 o'clock,
Mhm.
very often in the food boxes, it was just full of mice, and so
Oh.
you get it. I think I still am under shock at times when I see the mouse. But here's the thing. So I had a mouse one day in my house,
Mhm.
and at first I was scared as you can possibly think. I started putting up traps everywhere. My whole kitchen became a
Mhm.
fortress to make sure, that the little mouse couldn't sort of
Is
come through.
thought. Yeah.
But here's the thing, that little mouse was
Mhm.
persistent. She somehow managed all the time to bypass all the traps, go through the little fortresses and whatever I had closed off, so every hole
Uh-huh.
that I had closed off, that there could no mouse come through. So after a while, I actually began to have admiration for that little thing for that
Mhm.
reason. I was like, look at that little mouse. So there she is, tiny little. There are all these obstacles in front of her, and
Yeah.
yet she would bypass it.
Bypass
Lightweight,
it.
smart, quickly, all these things. So I started literally having a little relationship with the mouse and thought, like, well,
Mhm.
there are a lot of analogies I can actually take into my life and apply to my life. How do you
Mhm.
navigate obstacles? How do you get out when you feel like there are traps all around you? These are the things that I mean. That's how we build
Mhm.
a relationship. That's how we detect qualities in us. That's how nature can really show us in so many ways how to
True.
enliven our lives, ourselves, and by doing that, also nature,
Mhm.
give something back to nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Nico, this example reminds me of something that I read. So basically, they say, right, the nature is always giving you signals, and if you are actually connected with the nature or with the higher self, right, you know that there is a gut feeling that you have, right, and then there is an intuition that you have, right. So a lot of times you already know what's going to happen. Uh, and I've read that, especially birds, right? Say if there is something, if there is a storm coming, or if the weather is going to change altogether, right? These birds know it well in advance. Probably the sixth sense is so strong. The sixth sense is so strong that they already know what's going to happen, right? Probably that's what happened with the mice. Maybe somehow the intuition kicked in. The mice knew that okay, there are traps, and probably I have to navigate through it, right? But what I'm trying to ask is, do you think that the birds, the animals are very well connected to the nature, and that's why they have such a strong intuition, and they know what's going to happen or what's coming.
Oh,
And
yeah.
human beings, on the other hand, while we are seeing that the nature is getting destroyed, we are heading into a wrong direction altogether. Instead of seeing all these things, we are not able to actually act, or we don't even care about all these
I think that has several reasons. So I think when you look at animals,
things.
first of all, yes, animals pick up on this all the time. You see it with dogs, for example. They pick up energies long before any of us do. You
True.
see it with birds. You see it with a lot of in nature. You see it all the time. So their instinct and their perception in that regard is much bigger. But then also, don't forget, as humans, we have an extra dimension or complexity in that because we have a consciousness and a
Yeah.
mind and more body, so to speak, because it's not just the
Mhm.
physical body. So that means that we have all the tools, but we're only using 10% of what we have because we're
Yeah.
not being taught how to use that part, and that part goes into beyond the physical perception. That those are
Mhm.
attributes of the soul or the astral body. They can perceive these things.
Mhm.
So because we're not schooling it, because we're not trained in it, that's why we haven't developed that same perception yet. But could
Yeah.
we? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Nicolette, do you think the entire education system that's there currently, right, that needs to be revived? Because when we speak about what we are learning, what we actually should be learning, right? And when we speak about the astral body, when we speak about the soul, and when we speak about things that take us closer to the nature, I believe the current education system fails at teaching all those things, right? So do you think that needs to be revived altogether? So that I remember, right, like at least in India, right, we used to have gurukuls uh, long back, right? That was like hundreds of years back. So when an individual would enroll into a gurukul, they would actually be taught everything, right, from the life lessons to uh, learning about the nature, and then staying in harmony with everyone. And so there were various things that an individual would learn, right? But nowadays, I believe the education is all about how we can earn more money, how we can be rich, right? Probably that's what we are learning, right? Somewhere we have shed off the other things that are important for the human survival also. So do you think education would play a very important role if someone is taught right from the childhood, and if they are
I
made aware
think
of all these things?
I
Yeah.
think education nowadays is
Mhm.
part of the problem. I think that
Mhm.
the education system has systematically taken out all the spiritual, the philosophical, the arts part and focused purely on a scientific part. And that's
Yeah.
really the part is we cannot solve the problems we're in with
Mhm.
purely an empirical scientific approach to things because we're missing out the very essence and substance of life where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Science, empirical science, has no domain over the why of life.
Mhm.
Absolutely zero. That's why it never gets to the answers they seek because they have no dominion over it. The
True.
authority over dominion to the actual over life comes from the other side.
Mhm.
That's where it is. And remember, in many, thousands of years ago, in fact, people knew that you had science, philosophy, religion. They were taught in unison because they go together. That's the holistic approach. You have mind, body, soul. You're not just body.
Yeah.
And
True.
this part is missing. And so when you look at the education system, oh, it's all based on brainwashing, on repetition, on actually taking your creativity out. Look at what happens to our kids when they go to school. Most of
Exactly.
them, when they go in the first grade 1 and grade 2, they actually get stripped of all their creativity, their natural way of doing this. It's the complete
True.
opposite. It's really much more an approach to build a transhuman society and taking the human, the divine aspect out of us to really build this, what I used to say, the army of the clones. And you see it everywhere. You see it with neutering gender. You see it with neutering every principle of the universe that actually the universe is built on. And if we looked at nature, we would understand that that's what's happening. But because we're so, people believe now, because it's in the name of science, they being told stuff, they being told there is 4 billion stars. People believe it's 4 billion stars, other than actually challenging it and say, how do you get to that number?
Right.
You see what I mean? Like, it's these questioning things, these why,
The
ask
why.
the why
Yeah.
questions. Because at the
Right.
end, yes, there's a universal truth about things that we all have because we all function in a similar way. That's universal truth. You are universal truth. I'm universal truth as being a human. So we are the book of life, so to speak, the humans.
Yeah.
But the thing
Right.
is that we just we get so stripped of that identity by a system, an education system that basically tells you all the opposites. They want to
Yeah.
standardize something. And I really like to, for me, it has become very, very clear when you compare the word normal, where actually the word origin is. If you look at the Hebrew root of the origin of the word normal, it has the same root as disease. So in other words, this whole standardizing approach is actually a disease. There is no normal. But when you look at the word root for health in Hebrew, it's the same word root as creativity.
Okay.
So you see where I'm getting with this?
Yeah.
That's why when we approach schools, and there are systems, so there are schools, you see it now more and more, there are schools that are more like in private education now, that
Yeah.
go more in this holistic teaching where you really make children understand why is there actually a cycle, why are there 4 seasons in a year, what's the connection between the sun and the moon, why is it connected to the tides.
Yeah.
There's more of that actually goes back into showing the actual origin, which has a much deeper purpose and meaning than what most of us
Right.
grew up with. I remember, I think today, so I'm a Gen X. Now with all these ADHD, for example, I'm pretty sure that if they had already invented that back then, that most of us would have been diagnosed with ADHD, because it's not healthy for a child to sit 6 hours in a chair without moving and always being bombarded with information. A child is creative. You want to look out the window because you get inspired by the birds that fly around. You get inspired by hearing the noises that are there. This is what we need for our creative exchange.
True.
And there we have to sit there, with your hands straight and your body, you couldn't move, and you couldn't even go to the bathroom and all these things. And then you wonder when they came up, and teachers nowadays, they diagnose so many kids with ADHD because they're no longer used was actually a natural way of creativity is. We have busy minds.
Exactly, yeah.
Curious minds.
Yeah, we have, yeah. In fact, Nicolette, this is reminds me of there's this concept that has come up, right? There are like a concept of unlearning. You mentioned there are a few schools, right, which don't focus on the bookish knowledge, but then it's more about practical in nature, wherein they actually would take the kids out in the ground. They'll show how how you sow a seed, how the plant grows, right? And then a lot of things, right? So with the current age, of course, there are a few schools that are focusing on unlearning. One is I wanted your view on what you think about this unlearning concept, right? Wherein it's more practical in nature rather than spreading the bookish knowledge, right? And the other part is, say for example, now at least we have these schools with the unlearning concept, but then there are people in, say, probably my age group where we never knew about unlearning, right? And then probably we are at a stage where unlearning is going to be a big challenge, right? What we have learned is something that we can't unlearn, right? So how do we cope up with that, right? So one is, what do you think about unlearning as a concept, the new concept that has come up, and what do people in my age group do to unlearn and then to relearn what is necessary today?
That's actually a really interesting point that you bring up. I think to unlearn the learned.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes life helps you with that. And what am I getting with this is, so sometimes most of us get pushed to a stage in our life where you cannot do other than unlearn, because you come to a
Mm-hmm.
point where all the things you thought were true turn out to be a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah.
that you look at something, how it used to work, and you see that it no longer works. In fact, I think
Mm-hmm.
we're collectively even at this stage. When we look at,
Yeah.
business, society, economics, and you suddenly look at this and you go like, well, business as usual, well, that's no more. It's
Mm-hmm.
dead. So
Yeah.
suddenly you're confronted with a new reality, and then you kind of go like, you get sort of the push, you get pushed out of your chair in a way to sort
Yeah.
of go on the fast track for learning something new, because you come to realize that what we have is
Mm-hmm.
nonsense. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So that can help you very quickly to unlearn. It also, I found, I have to refer to this one also to a part in my career where I worked sometimes it helps you to do the opposite of what you
Mm-hmm.
know to actually unlearn what you've learned. So what do I mean
Mm-hmm.
by that? So most of us, particularly when you do a job and you've been in your job for a while, you know this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? You feel, at
True.
least you
Yeah.
feel that you know it. So you
You know
feel
it.
you've
Yeah.
built up a knowledge base. And then also with that, you built up a certain territorial hold on it, because you
Mm-hmm.
think this is what I've experienced, and you think like I know how this works, right? That's what we all feel.
Yeah.
But then when you do something in a different area where you become sort of a disciple of something new, you will find out that it also challenges at the same time all the things you thought you knew before,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of helps you on learning that. So in a way, I used to have a boss who would told me when I changed career direction, he said, I want you to
Mm-hmm.
put everything you know in,
Mm-hmm.
like you take it out of your head and you put it in a bowl and put it in the refrigerator, and just be open to learn something new.
New.
And I
Yeah.
actually took to that. I thought, okay, so because this is the case, I came from a very, very strong marketing and strategy background. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay, I'm going to focus on something that I completely dislike. I go in a different direction. I look in finances, which
Mm-hmm.
really was not something that came natural to me. In fact, I hated
Yeah.
finances. I just had like
Oh.
this relationship. I was like, what the heck? But once you start working at it, it changes
Hmm.
everything you knew from what you've done before, which is why I think for us to unlearn, actually a great way is generally not to be so long in one domain, but do different things. So you not
Um.
only become a disciple in something new, so once you've mastered one thing, you become a disciple in
Mm-hmm.
something new, but it also helps you unlearn the things that were untrue from what you thought they were true before,
Mm-hmm. Right.
to sort of seeing what's the connecting thread. So the
Yeah.
more you're exposed to different things, the more actually you understand the nature and the common thread. You
Mm-hmm.
understand what makes it sustainable, to get back to our topic. You understand the connecting thread that actually sustains all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Right.
that's the way for us to kind of challenge, push yourself out. I would encourage people to do the completely opposite of what you've done.
Right.
And if it's just to get your feet wet and understand more about this, I think it would
Mhm.
help tremendously, for example, if in businesses we would actually rotate people in different disciplines on
Exactly.
a more regular basis so they learn different aspects. Like you cannot be
True.
really good in HR, for example, if
Mhm.
you've never worked in marketing and sales and logistics and production, etc., because you don't understand the nature of what it entails to work in these different fields.
Mhm. Yeah.
But you do have a
Yeah.
different understanding once you have.
Yeah. And I believe this would also bring in different perceptions that people have, right? Different thought processes. Because a very simple example that I recollected, like even 3 plus 3 is 6, and 4 plus 2 also is 6, right? So
Mm.
basically, the end result is the same, but then everyone has a different route that they take, right? So uh, probably, I guess, even when it comes to unlearning the thing that you mentioned, maybe even on the business side, if people can switch the roles, pe- the new person can bring in a different perspective altogether, and yet through a different perspective, we would achieve the same or maybe better results, right?
Yeah. Actually, I
Yeah.
think, as long as we're talking about the unlearning, I think we also need to talk about the things we live collectively in. So right now we still
Mhm.
have this scarcity mindset, right? When actually,
Mhm.
though, in nature, there is no scarcity, it's an abundance
True.
mindset.
Abundance. Yeah.
So, how do we switch from having been trained for a scarcity, artificial scarcity mindset,
Mhm.
by the fiat money system, for example, by making things just limited for certain people, to a
Mhm.
mindset of abundance? And that's where you also have to unlearn what we've been learned and sort of go
Exactly.
back to our heavenly mindset in a way, which is expansive.
Right. Right. And Nicholas, in my experience, shifting from a scarcity mindset to a abundant mindset sometimes is very difficult, right? Because uh, you are not used to think that there is abundance, right? You have always been trained to think that no, there is something that's limited, and there is a rat race that's going on, right? So probably what you are talking about makes a lot of sense, right? That mindset shift is also really important.
It is very difficult, but I think there's also another
Yeah.
component to it, because when you've been trained all your life, and that could be through negative experiences and belief systems,
Mhm.
and we take on all these things. We take on belief systems from ancestors from generations ago. We take on baggage from stuff you we have, and then you have your own life experience with which
Yeah.
all build sort of our neurological networks in our body.
Mhm.
So when we sometimes talk of mindset shift, that's actually not enough, because a mindset shift,
True.
we always think, well, but I've shifted my minds, I've kind of gone into changing my belief systems and things like that. But yet you will
Mhm.
notice that once you're in tune with your body, you will still get to points where subconsciously you still undermine your efforts, because your body has a natural reaction, because you have built a neurological network that
Network
kind of
around it. Yeah.
acts, which that
Exactly.
was built for a reason, as a compensation strategy, but it kind of acts up for a reason. And so I found it extremely difficult to sort of rebuild that and work through. But once you get more aware of it and you start taking
Mhm.
an observer role and sort of see, wait a minute, so why am I thinking like this? Why do I have this vibrational response to that? Why am I even
Mhm.
focusing on that? And you learn how to deal with that willfully and on purpose. You learn to change your vibration on purpose. You learn to sort of work through your nervous system and start rebuilding a new neurological network. And there's different ways of doing that. You can do it through a
Mhm.
music transformation. You can do it, in fact, there are processes when you have your music cycle, for example. After hearing this 16 times, your system starts building a new neurological network.
Yeah. True.
So you can work with that, but you have to think also, the key is also, I think none of us can expect to do it overnight. It's a process,
Exactly.
and
It's a process.
we
Yeah.
struggle with that. And every time when you think like, oh, I'm past this, something gets presented to you that just reminds you, you're not done yet. You gotta do a
Yeah.
little more. You have to
Again,
work a little more.
again, something to learn from the nature, right, Nicolette? Like having patience, because
Yeah,
things don't happen overnight. Even if
yeah.
you have to change your neural patterns, right, it's going to take time. You keep doing it, and then probably one fine day you will see the difference that's happening. Awesome.
Yeah, and I think I will give you an example. I think it's actually really good because here, particularly in the United States, we always
Hmm.
want instant gratification. We expect everything to go quickly. Like if
Quickly,
you,
yeah.
that's why we have so many drugs because people want something right away. But when you
Hmm.
look at the actual natural process, I keep saying to people, well, if you plant a tomato plant, you're not going to harvest the tomato on the next
On
day.
the next
It's
day.
going to take a
True.
while.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there is such a thing as time, and on
Yeah.
the physical plane, time matters. It
Matters a
plays a
lot.
role.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Nicolette, with that, what would be your advice to our audiences, right? Like with all the topics that we have covered, right, from sustainability to spirituality, and then about the education system, the unlearning part, right? So, what would be your final advice to our audiences about the topic that we have discussed today?
So I would like to invite people to just go out in nature, make it maybe a daily habit, see what captures your eye, and
Mm-hmm.
try to connect with this particular animal, sound, plant, whatsoever, but try to connect on it on a different level. Try to see what actually fascinates you or touches you about that species or about that animal, about that sound, and
Mm-hmm.
start looking, asking the question as to why do you actually then react to it. It could be also something you dislike, could be the same thing. If you dislike something, that's also something to ask. Wait a minute, so
Yeah.
why, like in my case, when I remember my mouse case, why
The
was I
mouse.
afraid of a mouse? So when you
Right.
really look at this is something that's very easy to do, and it tells us
Mm-hmm.
everything. It shows us really how a flower contains everything of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
True. True. Amazing, Nicholas. Uh, I guess we had some deep discussions today. With that, Nicolette, it brings us to the end of this particular podcast. But I'm pretty sure that there is a lot that needs to be shared, right? And probably with the kind of knowledge that you possess, I easily see a lot of podcasts coming out of that, right? So maybe that's something that we'll leave for a later stage. But thanks a lot for your time, Nicola, today, and thanks a lot for sharing the knowledge that you have about sustainability and how in fact each and every individual can start adapting to it and how they can start implementing that in their daily lives, right? So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure hosting you today, and we look forward to have multiple podcasts with you.
Thank you very much, Lakir, as
Thank
well. I
you.
really did. I very much enjoyed that. And I will say, I think it would be really tremendous if we could sort of get an exchange going in terms of people sharing their insights
Certainly.
and sort of their stories of what they see in nature. I think once we actually get to that point,
Yeah,
we kind of start a real reconnection.
definitely. That's true. Yeah, yeah.
So I look forward to more
Perfect.
podcasts. I did enjoy that. Thank you very much for
Thanks,
having me.
Nicholas.